and all tablet devices is off, and you know how to do that. Apologies. The only apology I have here is from Rosie McCorley. So it brings us to our briefing, and there are only 5, probably go up to 6 shortly, but if initially we could just restrict ourselves to 1 question each, and then we get time at the end to come round again, probably for a second round, but just to give everybody a chance. We only have an hour before oral questions. Issues that aren't directly related to the draft budget, we can follow up on those with correspondence, but if we could keep just focused on the issue before us today. There will be an opportunity to return to issues in closed session at Thursday's meeting, and members should note that the deadline for the coordinated response to the Finance Committee on the draft budget is the 5th of December. So if you could look at the following correspondence. The Clerk's memo there is at page 5, and the memo has broken down a number of pertinent issues, each of which has its own line of questioning. Decal correspondence on the draft budget spending and savings proposals at page 11, draft budget then page 24, and the budget scrutiny research briefing page 90, and finance and personnel Clerk's memo page 96.
Apologies, Chair.
That's probably culture. Could I welcome the following officials to the meeting? We've got Arthur Scott, the Director of Culture, David Carson, Director of Finance and Corporate Services, and Fergus Devitt, the Director of Sports, Museums and Recreation, and invite you to make the opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thanks for the opportunity to address the committee on the draft 15-16 budget. Our meetings with the committee are a key part of the consultation phase on the draft budget. And you will know that our initial consultation document is also available on the Department's website. I'd like to begin with a brief outline of where we are at the moment in the draft budget and what we expect to do over the remainder of the consultation period. Following this, we're happy to take questions from members. I want to look first at the Department's budget allocation on resource. The draft savings allocation against decal is for a 10% cut. As the consultation document recognises, this level of reduction will present very serious delivery challenges across the whole of the decal family. In its initial allocation of this cut within the Department, it has been decided that a priority is to ensure that all existing libraries should remain open. Libraries NI have estimated that the largest cut it could accommodate and keep libraries open is 7.5%. This means that the cut required in other areas is for a reduction of 11.2%, so that we can deliver the overall required saving of 10%. We are now working on how these savings can be delivered in 15-16 and while minimising the impact on frontline services. All ALBs and areas of business within the Department have been asked to prepare savings delivery plans, setting out their proposals for delivering the required cuts. We are currently validating these plans to ensure that they are achievable, that underlying assumptions are realistic, that the scope for efficiency savings has been maximised, and that any detrimental impacts on frontline services have been minimised as far as possible. However, given that we are facing unprecedented cuts to budgets, it is inevitable that frontline services will suffer. And the consultation document outlines some of the likely impacts at a high level. These include grant programmes delivered by the Arts Council, Sports Council and the Department itself are going to be cut. Despite a measure of protection, library users will see reductions in opening hours and purchases of fresh book stock. In museums, opening hours will also reduce and galleries are likely to close. Events and exhibitions will fall in number and there may be seasonal closure of facilities. As well as affecting services to the public, these cuts will also require a reduction in the pay bill across the decal family. Payroll is the single largest cost within the department, libraries and within national museums. And this level of budget cut simply cannot be delivered without significantly reducing the number of people employed. This is likely to be the case across many other departments. Indeed, the whole subject has been of much media interest recently. The Executive is formulating a workforce restructuring plan which will include consideration of recruitment freezes, suppression of existing vacancies, pay restraint and a voluntary exit scheme. The Decal family cannot deliver its savings without reducing staff numbers through an exit scheme. And at the moment, we are working to quantify at a high level the number of staff that might be involved. However, in order to identify specific posts which may be surplus going forward, it will be necessary to review objectives, outcomes and processes. We will then need to develop a migration plan to take us from where we are now to where we want to be. This will be a challenging piece of work, particularly in view of the compressed timescales involved. At this early point, given that work has just begun in this area and because of the natural sensitivities around it, I do not wish to offer an estimate of the size of the staff reduction that might be required. However, it is important to point out that relying on staff reductions to deliver a significant portion of the total savings requirement does introduce a risk around achievability, particularly in view of the tight timescales involved. And we intend to explore this further as we move through the consultation period. Just finally, on resource, I'd like to clarify the position of the North-South bodies in the process. Budgets for the language body and Waterways Ireland are decided by the North-South Ministerial Council and so lie somewhat outside the draft budget. At this point in time, the business plans for these organisations from which the budgets are derived for the calendar years 2015 and 2016 have not yet been agreed. However, what I should say is that any reduction in required savings will impose further pressures on the department's budget. If we can turn just finally, Chair, to the capital position. The draft allocation for 15-16 is 54.1 million. We currently estimate a non-stadiums requirement of around 8 million to cover committed spend and to provide a baseline allocation to some ALBs. Among other things, this will cover sports facilities at Daisy Field, continuing the City of Culture legacy work, a boxing programme to refurbish clubs and buy new equipment, an allocation to continue the implementation of the sports strategy, an allocation to the sports governing bodies to continue facilities upgrading, completion of Moira Library and the completion of work at Ardoyne Youth Club. Assuming an imminent positive outcome to the casement judicial review, we estimate that in 15-16 the total stadiums requirement will be 58.1 million. In addition, there may be a requirement for 1 million to support the start-up of the sub-regionals stadium programme. In total, based on these estimates, there is a shortfall of around 13 million for next year. This has already been brought to the attention of DFP and will also be highlighted at the bilateral meeting with the DFP Minister, which is scheduled for the start of next month. That completes my summary of the current position, and as I say, we're now happy to invite questions and comments.
Okay. And just to remind those who came in a few minutes later there, we're restricting ourselves to one question each in a first round, and then we'll come round again if need be, if there's time before we finish, because obviously orals are at 2 o'clock. We've had a number of questions in the committee regarding the LIFA project. What inescapable commitments are there moving into 15-16 in regard to that?
Arthur, maybe Arthur can provide that information, Chair.
think there would be a number of inescapable, Chair, in relation to the staffing costs and the LIFA website and the maintenance costs and the contract for the provision of the LIFA.
How long is the
website.
contract for?
Pardon?
How long is the contract for?
It's an annual contract which is renewable.
So it wouldn't have to be renewed then?
Pardon?
It wouldn't have to be renewed?
It would be an option not to renew it.
So it's not inescapable in that regard? So it isn't inescapable?
Well, in the sense that the campaign runs to 2015, I'm assuming that it will be continue to be required. So it's not strictly in the sense that you're asking.
Well, it either is inescapable or it isn't, and clearly it isn't. It's an option, it's a wish list, or it's a desire or an aspiration, but it's not inescapable. Would that be correct?
Well, in terms of the Department's forward work plan to achieve the aims of the LIFA initiative,
But
it would be required.
That is not how you define
It's not- it's
inescapable.
not- it's not
So it's not
contractually
inescapable.
inescapable.
Will you accept that
It
it's
could be
not?
terminated.
Yeah, it could be terminated, but it's not inescapable. It took us a while to get there, Arthur. We got there in the end. Who's next question? Oh, Basil. Yeah.
Can you just run me through the shortfall in the capital investment that you were saying? That seems to be a very large deficit.
Yeah. Well, as I said, there's a number of schemes that we're outside the Stadia programme that we're hoping to take forward next year, and we've got some tails of existing schemes. And in total, that amounts to around, I think it's 8 million. And in addition to that, then we have the projected amount for the stadia, the regional stadia, and a further £1 million for the sub-regional stadia. And it's when you add all those together, we're 13 million, some 13 million pounds above the draft allocation, or the allocation in the draft budget.
The issue is always, though, that 90.3 million in so the capital expenditure for this current financial year is unlikely to be drawn down.
Yes.
Is there any possibility, given that if Casement does get a positive outlet, that you'll get an automatic transfer on that?
Well, the amounts that are against the programme for the regional stadia, those are ring-fenced and have to be given back to the centre. We don't have any control over the decisions about how that money is allocated. Certainly, we have been informed, or keeping DFP informed of the position on the regional stadia and the likelihood that money will be handed back. And certainly, our expectation is in those discussions that the funding requirements for the future there will be sympathetic treatment of those.
And just finally, because everybody wants to have a chance, the issue on...
Sorry, Basil, just if we just move on, we'll come back in due course. David Hilditch.
Thanks, Chair. And David, you referred to the decal family as such and the different components of the family. They're currently restructuring financial savings plans at this current moment that through the consultation period. When will that be completed, and will the committee get sight of that before it's finalised?
Well, the process is being worked through at the moment, Mr. Hilditch. We have received initial savings proposals from all of the ALBs, and we're currently scrutinising those, looking at the assumptions which underpin those, and how the ALBs are proposing to deliver the savings. With cuts of these magnitudes, this is unprecedented, really, for the ALBs. And in developing their plans, I would envisage that there will be quite a bit of dialogue between us and them in trying to so that we can be comfortable with with how they plan to proceed. In terms of timing, I wouldn't like at this stage to be definitive about when that process will come to an end. Certainly, I appreciate that in terms of the consultation, in order to inform that process, there is, and the public needs to know the sorts of things that are likely to happen. And I think that is why the department has been keen to get something out quickly, albeit at a high level. But in terms of the more granular detail, as I say, we're working through that at the moment, and I wouldn't at this stage be able to be definitive about when that process will come to an end.
Yeah, but will the committee get this, scrutinise it again, or is that?
I think we would want to be updating the committee as we work through that process. And certainly I'm aware there's a further session with the committee on the 11th of December. I'm happy to provide an update at that time.
Thank you. Leslie Cree.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering, gentlemen, what scope there is for double funding between the department and its arm's length bodies? What sort of a system is there to ensure that that doesn't happen, or is it acceptable that it does?
Well, no, I don't think that it does happen. The ALBs have a specific remit in relation to, you're talking now about funding, further funding to third parties, Mr. Creek. Generally, those funding decisions would be made by the arm's length body, if the department was funding a third party on its own account, it would ensure that there was no funding already in the system, or if there was, that had been taken into account, stipulating the amount to go.
If you take, for example, the Londonderry City of Culture Legacy project, there's quite a sum in the departmental budget for that, but I also noticed it was 900,000 in the Arts Council for what appears to be some sort of agreement. 900,000 on a 50-50 basis with the City Council?
I'm not aware of that specific reason, but perhaps Arthur, is this something that you could?
This is a direct funding award for the legacy made by the Arts Council to the City of Culture, and as David has outlined, the department, in providing any additional assistance, would take account of and be aware of those. I mean, the City of Culture itself, the whole event, was delivered on a sort of strategic cocktail of funding, as has the legacy. So there are steps in place to liaise with our arm's length bodies to ensure that the double funding that you suggest is avoided. There's also the government funding database, which keeps a record of all funding made available to third parties, which provides a fraud detection measure and a means of control. If, despite the checks and processes that are in place, are not followed, that these can be picked up and investigated afterwards.
Okay. Leslie.
And I'm not quite sure you've answered the question. In this specific case, and it's only one that I've looked at, would that come out of the original departmental budget for the legacy project, or would it in fact come out of the Arts Council award?
The funding that the Arts Council made would have been allocated to it by the department, so it's from the Arts Council's funds.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Can I ask you, and go back to LIFA, in terms of, Arthur, you talked about the pressures of staffing costs and maintenance and so on. Why then did the department keep LIFA in the department and not pass it on to the arm's length body that has responsibility to promote the Irish language?
At the time when the department was considering the LIFA initiative, Forest na Gaeilge was asked if it could deliver the initiative, and because of staffing shortage at that time, they weren't able to respond to the department's request, which is why it was taken forward by the department.
And when was that?
The LIFA campaign started in 2011-2012.
And so, since 2011-2012, Forest na Gaeilge has not been in a position to take this on because it hasn't been fit for purpose. Is that really the key position?
Forest na Gaeilge were unable to take it on because they indicated that they hadn't sufficient staff resource to dedicate to the LIFA initiative.
Yeah, but the point I'm making is that is the constituted body agreed under the Belfast Agreement to promote the Irish language. And even though they indicated that to the department still retained this project, which is about promoting the Irish language, in the department.
Yes.
So in actual fact, that completely undermines Forest na Gaeilge.
I wouldn't agree that it undermines Forest na Gaeilge. It complements the work that Forest na Gaeilge are carrying out to support the development of the Irish language across the island.
Right.
Well, I think we'll come back to this again, I think, on another occasion, and maybe get Forest na Gaeilge here along with yourselves, and then we'll be able to get to maybe to the bottom of it.
We have them scheduled for January, Chair.
Oh, they're coming to get together in January. That's good. Karen McKevitt.
Thanks very much, Chairman. The saving measures within the department will include the refiguration of the back office staff, and also discretionary overhead costs will be minimised, etc. And the review of grant allocations. Can you explain that a wee bit more on who that will affect, what that will affect?
Well, yes. At this stage, it's very early, and we're looking at initial proposals, and I would have to stress that. But the picture for 15-16, the department has around 3 million in its baseline for grant allocation, and the rest of its budget, which is around 20 million in total, is taken up with payroll and with overhead costs. And what we're looking at is the contribution that each area can offer up to the savings requirement. In 15-16, we have a particular issue in relation to the timing of a staff exit scheme. What we're currently doing is we're looking at the allocation, the current profile of grant allocations, and the impacts if those were reduced on the recipients. We're not yet at a stage where we have completed that assessment, but that is work which is currently underway, and I wouldn't want at this stage to be to go into detail about the way that will eventually play out.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Cathal Hutchins coming back, so we'll come to him in due course. Could I just ask, in regard to the funding there for Ardoyne Youth Club, why is Youth Service not, or the Department of Education not covering the cost of that?
Fergus will...
Chair, that relates specifically to boxing. It's boxing activity in Ardoyne Youth Club, so that's why the department is involved in terms of its sports remit.
And is this to refurbish the building, or what?
Yeah, I think it has issues around its premises, and it's seeking either to refurbish its existing premises or potentially move, is my understanding of it. But I can certainly get more detail on it.
Are there any other instances of sports activity taking place in youth clubs, which happens quite regularly, getting funding from DCAL?
I wouldn't know the full detail off the top of my head, Chair, but my understanding is that the funding given out, which is primarily through Sport NI, goes directly to sports clubs rather than to youth clubs.
But then this subverts that principle.
Well, I think the issue is that the Ardoyne Youth Club is potentially also known as Ardoyne Boxing Club, and certainly within the department we would refer to it as Ardoyne Boxing Club.
Well, I've always known it as Ardoyne Youth Club, so it used to be that's what it said over the door.
Okay.
Just so, and the position then is that any sports activity, any sports club that uses a youth club, can now apply directly to the department, not through Sport NI.
No, this would be through Sport NI.
And Sport NI will then fund, just to get it clear for ourselves, Sport NI will fund physical works to a youth club that accommodates a sports club.
That's not necessarily the case, Chair. I mean, Sport NI has a very rigorous process that it would go through to determine whether capital investment or maintenance or whatever is actually needed. And it's actually going through a programme of work at the moment with all the councils. It's called a facilities strategy, to map exactly what sports facilities are in place and at what locations. And that will ultimately influence and determine what funding decisions are going to be made in the future. because, for example, you could have a range of sports bodies applying for 3G pitches in a very similar or close proximity to each other, and that clearly wouldn't be a very good use of investment. So Sport NI is working with ourselves and primarily the councils to make sure that whatever investment goes into sporting activities is actually delivering new and improved facilities rather than replicating.
But that particular money is money that was through a funding stream that anybody could apply to.
Sorry, Chair, didn't catch
That particular bit of funding to Ardoyne Youth Club for the boxing element is part of a funding stream that anybody could have applied to.
It's specifically for boxing.
Oh, so they started handing out the boxing money already?
Yes, some of that boxing money has gone out. Yes.
Oh, right. Right.
There have been improvements to some boxing facilities already.
Okay, as part of this package of boxing. Okay.
Yes.
Fine, again, that's for an
But
update on
can I
that.
just add,
Yeah.
but why are you singling out Ardoyne then? Presentation.
I think it's because there's a contractual commitment there to take forward some work, and that's why the pressure, as David referred to earlier, is already in our system. It's a bit like in one of my other areas of responsibility, Mora Library. Mora Library has started this year, but will require funding next year to complete it. So we know that is contributing to a pressure.
Go back over the list again then, all the people who've indicated. Basil was first.
Thank you. The administration costs of the department have risen from 6.7 million to 7.3 million, which is an increase of about 9%. So I just wonder, what percentage of the department's current expenditure is on staff costs?
About 50%, just above 50%.
And are you planning a straight reduction, a straight 11% cut in the departmental expenditure, taking it out of costs?
That's our starting point. At our starting point, we will be testing that figure as we work through our plans. But inevitably, given the fact that payroll does account for such a large proportion, I think we do need to deliver significant staff savings in order to achieve our overall budget reduction.
Could you say that you would be prioritising staff reductions as of against frontline services?
We'll certainly be focusing in the area of staff reduction, but I think it is simplistic to think that by reducing staff we're going to be safeguarding frontline services, because very often by reducing staff there will be a direct knock-on impact on frontline services, and it's the nature of those impacts that we will be testing as we work through our plans.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. David Hillage.
Thanks, Chair. I want to return briefly to the boxing. The money that was allocated by the Minister in relation to boxing, and the committee was very supportive of that work. Was that whole package not ring-fenced for boxing?
It was, yes.
It was.
Yeah, and a number of works have already started to be delivered. Some of it is quite small scale in terms of equipment, like pads and gloves and that type of thing, and so, some of it also is around maintenance as well.
So there's some money left to be bid for yet in that fund?
I don't know the exact amounts, but maybe we can come back with the detail if that's...
Please, 'cause
It would be helpful actually if it was possible. We have another meeting on Thursday.
Okay.
And we'll be coming back to some of these issues at that, so it'd be helpful to have what the total package was for boxing, what has been allocated so far, what other applications are in, and how much it's the demand exceeds supply, and so on, if it does.
Even if we come back with bullet points, Chair, for Thursday, would that
All we
be-
need is just bullet points, just lines with a
Sure.
name and a figure against them. That's all we need. Nothing more detailed than that.
Okay.
That's great. Leslie Cree.
Thanks again, Chair. Gentlemen, I'd just like to refer now to the capital budget. As you probably are aware, there's over 35 million in financial transactions capital unallocated in the current year.
Yeah.
Now, 10% of that is all the most we can keep, so we're going to be sending back over £30 million. I notice that in your capital budget, you have no allocation, or sought no allocation, of FTC for next year. Why is that?
We haven't been able to identify a scheme or a partner which would fill the conditions of financial transactions capital. The money is, generally speaking, the bodies that we're dealing with would not be in a position to pay back a loan of that nature. And that is a major stumbling block in being able to utilise the scheme. So that, I think, is the principal reason why we have difficulty in taking advantage of that scheme in the sector.
Well, has any work been done in identifying likely clients, in fact, how it can be switched around so that the private sector can avail of this very attractive capital?
Well, certainly there has been an appraisal undertaken, and we remain open to proposals coming forward. But as I say, at this stage, we haven't been able to identify any suitable schemes.
Have you actually gone out and looked, and
Yes,
spoke to?
but there has been an appraisal undertaken of the scope for utilising the scheme in this
Would it
area.
be possible to see that, Chair?
Well, it would be a fairly informal thing. I'm not sure to what extent there is a formal report, but certainly I
Be
can
better
look
than
and
nothing,
see.
yes, thank you.
Okay. William Humphrey.
Thanks, Chair. Can I ask if we go back to Casement Park? The last time you guys were in, we were asking for an update on that. Where does it sit now in terms of the court case, the legal case around it, and work actually commencing on the stadium?
Sorry, I missed that question, Mr. Humphrey.
Casement Park. Where does it actually? The last time we got an update on the court case, and I was just wanting to find out where does it sit now in terms of the court case and the legal action. You know, when will work actually commence? Do we know yet?
Well, we are still awaiting a judgment, the outcome of the judicial review, and we hope that it will be forthcoming imminently. And we are currently working on the assumption that the commencement of the construction work on Casement can take place in January of 2015, and that's the basis on which our financial projections are pulled together.
Okay. If that doesn't happen, David, can we ensure that as much as is possible, given the pressures that there are in relation to the regional stadia in some of the grounds across Northern Ireland, particularly we've heard from the World Cup people the pressures that there are in Coleraine, and you know, in terms of facilities there. There are others, obviously. Taylor's Avenue and Carrick could be a considerable hub of football, according to some people. In relation to that, you know, can that money be a bid be made to the centre for that money to be used for sub-regional stadium, so it's not lost to football?
Well, we're talking to DFE about the position of the sub-regional. We have a strategic outline case there. The next stage in the process is for outline business case to be developed, and how that will be done and the process through which that will be worked is actively being discussed. And the £1 million that I alluded to earlier would relate to that work and being able to take that forward next year.
Okay, thank you.
Karen McKellar.
Yeah, thanks very much. Asset-related cost to the department, I suppose, is a huge, big amount. And you spoke earlier about contractual with the boxing and how you have to go back into next year's budget in order to deliver. Would that be the same for libraries that need maintenance, a lot of maintenance spent on them? In my head, I'm thinking of like a Castlewellan library, which needs a good bit of maintenance.
Not necessarily. It depends on the nature. The Moira Library is a capital build. It's a complete new build, almost, of the Moira Library. In terms of maintenance, those are more in-year issues rather than issues that will go over 2 years. A certain amount of the library NI budget each year is given over to that type of maintenance and improvement activity anyway, so there is budget available for it. I think the question will be how much Libraries NI wants to spend going forward on maintenance, health and safety type issues and others, and making a judgment as to what type of investment it wants to make out of it, the overall amount of money available to it.
Is that money's being reduced?
Well, those are decisions for Libraries NI. Library NI budget is being reduced, but within that it will have to decide how it allocates whatever money it has left, because clearly it has significant staff costs to meet and other priorities as well. So with all our arm's length bodies, these are decisions that they in the first instance are going to be taking.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hushin.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies, I missed most of your presentation I got at the start there, but just in terms of the City Culture Legacy Fund in there, you mentioned, David, I think the Daisyfield project, and is there other projects within it that you're aware of there that are still included within that remit?
We need to check back at my list, but I believe that there are other elements for the City of Culture within the capital programme for next year. I'm just not able to list the specific ones, but I'm happy to provide a list if that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Basil.
Could I just go back to the impact of staff reductions? Have you anticipated or done any work on the cost of making staff reductions?
At a very high level, yes. But we've been working throughout on the assumption that there will be a central fund available to fund those costs.
So could you give us some idea of the quantum? You know, I know at a high level that you think you will have to be applying to the centre for.
We're still talking to DFP about the what those figures might be. At this stage, you know, it depends on what assumptions you employ and on the terms of the scheme that would be available to for voluntary exits.
Yes, but
so it would be a range which it could be quite a significant range.
Let's just well, give us a range then.
Well, the maximum is 21 months' salary for an individual who would be availing of the voluntary exit scheme. They'd be entitled to the maximum of 21 months. As I understand it, although as one approaches retirement age, that entitlement will taper off depending on the age of the staff member. So it really depends on the personal circumstances of those who would want to avail of the scheme.
But for budgeting purposes rather than individuals, could you give a figure that you think it would be advisable to be talking to DFP about to make provision?
Well, we could calculate a figure. I just wouldn't have that in off the top of my head, but we could provide that to you if that again would.
Could you? That would be useful. Could you give us some? You must have some. It's obviously if 50% of your budget is staff,
yeah,
and you're going to have to make 11.2% cuts. You must have some idea about the actual costs that you're going to have to make, because I suspect it'll cost you more in the current year to make the redundancies than it will be in the savings that you're going to make.
But again, we have made the assumption that we will be able to fund those costs from the central scheme, and there's the central fund. There is £100 million available.
So we understand that there is a central pot,
yes,
but that affects all of us. What I want to know is what is the quantum that you are likely to be asking for, approximately, not holding you to it, approximately how much will DCAL be asking DFP to take out of that £100 million pot?
Well, I can come up with a figure, as I say. I couldn't give you that. I don't have it in front of me, but it will be a very much a first stage estimate. But we can provide that if it would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. David Hilditch.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just looking down the table and I do see that the Waterways Ireland and languages are dictated basically by the North-South agreement and how they're funded, so there's probably not a lot there. But we had previously raised, Chair, the building, for instance, at Waterways Ireland at Enniskillen and the size of it and how much it cost and how much of it appears to be lying pretty vacant at the moment. Must be people working there and never see each other for weeks on end. Has there any influence over how things could be better managed in that front, in that area?
But maybe Arthur would like to comment on that point.
The committee will be aware that the two finance ministers agree a level of efficiencies to be driven by out of the North-South bodies. The Waterways Ireland and the Language Body are delivering on those requirements. Waterways Ireland have made their building available for community uses and others. Their staff are engineering staff. They have a very large navigation. So there certainly are occasions when there are people out of the office, or other occasions, certainly when I've been in it, when offices are filled. But like the rest of the public sector, they are required to deliver efficiency savings.
Sorry, Chair, it just all seemed out of sync with the actual operation that takes place, and it was explained to us that people being out of office on the waterways and whatnot stuff. And I was just wondering if there's any influence as to how it could be better used and maybe create some further income for the department. Thanks.
Would there be an estimate for the value in terms of income of office space in there that is unused? To give us a sense of a lost opportunity. What's the value of the rental space there that is unused?
Don't have an exact
could we
figure,
get that?
Chair, but it would obviously value for rated purposes. So the calculation that you asked could be made. That will engage with Waterways Ireland and try and provide that information for them.
Okay. Just, I'll bring in Leslie Crane in a minute, just to ask a question there. Regarding the Change Fund, there's £30 million there tailored especially towards reform-oriented projects that are innovative and involve collaboration and so on. Has the department considered any bids that it might make to the Change Fund?
We are actively looking at that at the moment, Chairman. Certainly, we would be keen, if we can, to avail of that fund or to submit a bid to it. That's just arrived with us, and we are actively looking at that at the moment.
Is there a particular area within the department that it would have relevance to, or?
Well, I think it could go right across potentially a number of the department's areas, and there may be work which maybe collaborative initiatives being taken forward, for example, with education, that could qualify to be funded through the scheme. But I'm myself not aware of or sufficiently familiar with the detail, but I can say that that is being actively looked at.
Leslie Cree.
Thanks again, Chair. Just touched on assets there. Are any of the department's assets assisted by the RRI fund? Reform Investment Initiative?
This is what you referred to earlier, Mr. Cree, is it?
No, this is something else. It's a different fund.
Oh,
One that government uses generally.
I don't think so.
I don't believe that they are, but we can confirm that point for you.
And perhaps it links in obviously to asset management, and as you know, the department did have the power to deal with that. That's now been transferred to the assets management unit. Is there anything going to happen during the 15-16 year that you'd interested at this point in time?
I don't believe so, but certainly again we'll confirm that for you.
It might be worth saying that we are doing some work around shared services. Looking at the issue of shared services among our arm's length bodies to see what scope there might be for shared services. I know it's not directly on assets, but it is looking to see what mechanisms there might be to better use shared services across our arm's length bodies and achieve some efficiencies there.
Finance Committee, as you know, Chair, has been doing some work on flexible working, and it's sort of tees into all this whole thing. So thanks for that.
In terms of assets, are there portions of land or other assets that fall within the remit of the department through an arm's length body, which might be, now that the value of land is going up again, which might be realised?
Well, that is something which is being considered within the remit of the asset management plan, and certainly where I don't believe that there are significant issues or redundant holdings of land or buildings. But that is something that we would be looking at in the course of the work on the savings reduction.
And what sort of timescale would you be looking at for that, getting that work done?
This is more or less immediate over the next few months.
Okay. William Humphrey.
Thanks, Chair. Can I ask, gentlemen, a couple of weeks ago we had the Irish Bowling Association in front of this committee, who have been given £55,000 by Sport NI to develop sport, that sport in Northern Ireland. I think there are some 400 clubs and thousands of players. £55,000, I think, isn't a lot of money, but they were nevertheless appreciative of that. Last week I met the Northern Cricket Union. We haven't got any money from Sport NI for the last 3 years, albeit they haven't asked for it. What is the department doing to reach out to sports that are not the main sports, i.e. football, Gaelic or rugby, to ensure that the development of those sports, and boxing was talking about earlier, bowling is a sport where we consistently perform well at the Commonwealth Games, for example, and yet the money going into those clubs is very small, may even be described as derisory. Is there more the department can do to reach, or through Sport NI can do to reach out to these sports and provide more equity of funding for smaller sports? Smaller sports, in the sense of they're not attracting huge crowds, but they are large sports in terms of participation.
Yeah, I know from direct contact with Sport NI that they're in the process at the moment of developing their corporate plan, which would take them from 2015 up to, I think, 2019. And the issues that you raise are among those that they are going to be addressing. They are going to be very focused on participation, and participation across a range of sports, not just a certain number of sports. They also have a range of funding programmes into which organisations can bid for funding, whether that's for capital improvement, equipment, coaching, development, and alongside that, then clearly Sport NI also has a focus on developing the elite end and taking people through from participation right through performance into delivery of medals, and that's going to be very clear in terms of their corporate plan and strategy. I think it's important, as you mentioned, that a range of sports have access to funds and to funding, and Sport NI is very aware of that, and that participation can come in many forms and across a range of sports, and even outdoor activities such as walking and others as well, which then lead into a wide range of health benefits, both physical and mental health benefits as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Karen McKevitt.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Mr. David, you spoke earlier, just in the reply to Mr. Crees, about and how you're looking into that.
Yeah.
Can I ask, is there any discussions with the Department of Education or DEL into the use of shared services, and maybe funding the like of school children to go to visit museums, and maybe part that funding or arts or etc. And opening up doors and how to increase the activity around assets that we already have, or the department already has in culture, arts and leisure.
Yeah, I think that's a very important part of what we will be looking at, and in fact it's already happening. We work as a department very closely with the likes of the Department of Education and the Department for Employment and Learning. DE and ourselves have actually signed a service level agreement recently around a range of issues. There is free access to school children across a range of sites in the DCAL family. There's a number of job clubs, for example, from the DEL perspective, that operate in our libraries. We work very closely with DARD in terms of the rural provision in our libraries and what services there are there. And we also work in conjunction with DHSSPS on mental health services that are provided across libraries. So that range of activities and cross-departmental working is already happening, and I would imagine that there's scope for more of that.
Do they bring money to the table, those other departments?
Sometimes they do, yes. Sometimes they do. Sometimes it's more about actually using the physical space and the assets, such as a library, to allow other departments or services to be run from them. I know, for example, in Newcastle, there's work being done with the Alzheimer's Society, Health in Mind, and others like that. So I think it's about maximising the use of the DCAL estate as well, to that extent, and providing services across a range of functions.
Can I add that? Was there any discussions with the like of DSD on using the assets of the estate for the like of hearing appeals and stuff? Maybe libraries that could be used that instead of courthouses?
Yeah, I'm not aware of that specific one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, maybe consider.
Chair, just in terms of the admin costs, again, I say I'm sort of at a disadvantage because I did miss much of the presentation there. The proportion there, is there any room for any savings there within the admin cost? That's 10% of the overall budget, is that right?
I'm not aware of that particular figure.
Okay. It's risen here to 8.96 over the last 3 years.
But I think generally speaking, in relation to administrative costs, that has to be an area that we will be looking at in particular at the scope for savings, particularly if we can avoid having to go to frontline services. But because of the magnitude of the cuts involved, all expenditure items will need to be considered.
It seems that admin there seems to have cost a lot more than some of the other ALB delivery areas like Sports NI, Languages, Waterways, Ireland, and other ALBs put together even. Just does seem excessive, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think perhaps the only point I would make in relation to that is that DCAL is a relatively small department, and as a proportion of its overall expenditure, administrative costs would be higher, as it's unable to secure the economies of scale that would be present in a larger department. So that will contribute to the overall picture.
Notwithstanding that, a number of the ALBs have their own administrations as well.
Yes.
Is there any doubling up there that could perhaps maybe be looked at?
Well, as Fergus has referred to the shared services project, and that's one of the objectives of that project, is to try and identify any savings that there might be through sharing of those sorts of services. We're looking specifically at, for example, internal audit and IT services, where there will be benefits, savings to be achieved through working together. That's being actively taken forward at the moment. And if we do identify savings, I think we'd be keen to look at other areas in the same vein.
Would it be possible to get an explanation just around that rise from 6.7 million in 11-12 to 7.3 million in October 14? That's a rise of 600,000. Now, depending on what salaries there are, or what level of salary you're talking about, this significant number of people. What are these extra posts?
That information, Chair, where are you taking those figures from?
Chair, we have that from the research that was provided to the committee as part of the Assembly's financial scrutiny unit. We can provide that to you.
Yes, that would be helpful.
Our understanding was that came directly from the department.
Right. It would be helpful just to have those numbers.
We'll certainly do that. It works out just 8.969% rise over that period. And we'll certainly forward on what was provided by the researchers. But if you could just give us an indication of where those extra posts were, what brought them into the department.
I know that there has been some one-off work in relation to specific initiatives. Like we've had the World Police and Fire Games, for example, and it may be that they have that has been the cause of that rise, but we can certainly confirm the reasons for you.
Okay. Oliver McMullen.
Thank you, Chair. Will the money in the budget for disability sports be protected?
We're working closely with Sport NI at the moment to go through its proposals in terms of where it might see budget reductions coming across its range of programmes. I can't say for certain at this particular point in time if any areas of its expenditure are going to be protected. That's something we can work through the detail of.
Okay, and has RPA had any input into the budget thought process?
RPA in terms of the reorganisation of the councils?
Yes.
Not directly into the budget process, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure if you were here.
I beg your pardon.
No, but it's important because I wouldn't mind to emphasise it again. Sport NI is doing a significant piece of work with all the new council areas around a facility strategy to map what sports facilities there are in what areas and what investment in the future should enhance those rather than duplicate.
Thank you.
Could I just add, Chair, the Ministerial Advisory Group on Architecture and the Built Environment is also heavily involved in working with the councils in terms of their placemaking and planning, which they're offering advice and guidance to the council.
Thank you.
Of course, we are transferring some sites currently operated by the department to the council.
Thank you.
I think we'll end the briefing there. Thank you indeed for coming. That's been very helpful. We need a few minutes just to do some additional work, and then we'll head off to the shiver. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll return to some of these things on Thursday, I'm sure. But are there any actions members wish to take in the meantime? Or are content to wait to Thursday? Okay. So we know their business meeting on Thursday is in the Spectrum Centre, in the foremost constituency in Northern Ireland, at 10 a.m. on Thursday.
Coming my way. Does the move to Spectrum Centre somewhere? The move to Spectrum Centre.
And we'll adjourn the meeting then. Thank you.